Welcome to the AI for Career Success video overview by Curt Robbins, where we help you get smarter than your competition. This analysis is based on reporting and commentary from LinkedIn on February 4th, 2026. And today, we're looking at a major corporate restructuring at the Washington Post. You know, it's one of America's most prestigious newspapers. So what does this strategic reset really mean? And more importantly, what could it be signaling for the future of journalism itself?
All right, to really get to the heart of this, we're going to break our analysis down into 5 key areas. We'll start with the official announcement, then we'll turn to the human cost of these cuts. After that, we'll examine a really sharp critique from a former top editor, look at the wider industry trends, and finally, we'll ask what the broader implications are for all of us.
Okay, so let's start with Section 1, the official announcement and the sheer scale of this decision.
So the news that came out was, well, pretty staggering. The Washington Post announced it was laying off 1/3 of its entire news organization. Now, let's be clear, this isn't just a minor trim. This is a massive reduction, a decision that would inevitably ripple through every single part of the newsroom.
The phrase used by the executive editor, Matt Murray, to describe all this was a strategic reset. Now, that's some classic corporate speak, right? But what it really signaled was a fundamental, and I mean fundamental, shift in what the Washington Post is and what it's trying to be. The official company statement went on to say that these cuts were made to strengthen our footing and sharpen our focus. The argument here, essentially, is that to save the core of their journalism, they had to shrink. It's a painful logic, but that was the public rationale.
But this so-called reset wasn't applied evenly across the board. Far from it. Some departments were hit incredibly hard. The entire sports desk was just gone, shuttered. Their flagship daily news podcast, Post Reports, was suspended. And really deep cuts were made in foreign affairs and books coverage, areas, where the Post had built this incredible global reputation.
So, that's the corporate narrative. But of course, behind these press releases and strategic statements, there are hundreds of real people whose lives were turned upside down. Let's move to the human cost of these cuts. Almost immediately, personal stories started to emerge. Sam Fortier, one of the laid-off journalists, put it very bluntly. "I am sad and angry." And you can really feel the frustration in that statement. It's not just about losing a paycheck. It's about being prevented from doing the very work you feel is vital. And you see a very similar sentiment from another journalist, J.M. Rieger. You can hear the disappointment, but it's mixed with this immense sense of honor, this pride in having been part of that institution, working alongside, in his words, some of the best journalists in the business. And it wasn't just difficult for those who were let go. Think about the people who remained. Elahe Azadi, a Post employee, shared this sense of devastating loss, watching talented, brilliant colleagues leave and seeing key projects just vanish. That's a profound blow to morale and to the paper's institutional knowledge. The reaction, however, wasn't limited to current or former staff. A very powerful voice from the Post's recent past weighed in, and he delivered an absolutely devastating critique of the entire situation.
That voice belonged to Martin Barron, the paper's celebrated former executive editor, and he did not mince words. He called it one of the darkest days in the history of what he considers one of the world's greatest news organizations.
Now, Barron's point here is crucial. He acknowledges that the news business faces real challenges. Of course it does. But he argues that the crisis at the Post was made infinitely worse by, and this is his phrase, ill-conceived decisions that came from the very top. He's pointing the finger squarely at the leadership.
And here we see the incredible gap in perspective. On one hand, you have the company's official line, a careful, measured, strategic reset. And on the other hand, you have Martin Barron's assessment, a case study in near-instant self-inflicted brand destruction. Those two statements could not be further apart.
He really concluded with a direct challenge. He said he'd like to hear the owner and the publisher actually articulate a clear, contemporary vision for the paper's future. And then he adds this kicker. He says that vision is years overdue.
So this raises a big question. Is this just a story about one newspaper and a series of poor decisions? Or is what happened at the Washington Post actually a symptom of a much larger shift that's happening across the entire media landscape? Well, some commentators, like Dan Watley, argue that this is part of a broader trend.
The idea is that the center of gravity in media is shifting away from large, legacy institutions like the Post and toward individual creators. The influential writers and journalists on platforms like Substack.
But, and this is a really big but, that perspective often overlooks the crucial role that only big institutions can play. We're talking about the deep, foundational, day-in, day-out news gathering. It's expensive, it's often not glamorous, and it's the kind of work that individual commentators, who often focus on trending topics, just don't have the resources to do.
And that brings us to our final section, and perhaps the biggest question of all. What does all of this mean for us, for the future of journalism, and for its essential role in a functioning democracy? The core concern, as Dan Whately puts it, is that the powerful will celebrate it. And why would they celebrate? Because they know that fewer journalists asking tough questions means the public will simply know less about what they're doing. It's a direct threat to public accountability. Which leaves us with this final, critical question to ponder. When these legacy news organizations retreat, when they shrink and lose their capacity, who steps up to fill that void? Who will have the resources, the institutional backing, and the public trust to hold power accountable? The answer to that question is not at all clear, and it might just be one of the most important challenges that we face. Thank you for joining this analysis. This is where we teach you AI and help you get smarter than your competition. If you like these videos, use the QR code at the beginning or end of this video to buy us a coffee. We encourage you to subscribe to the AI for Career Success YouTube channel, and please like, comment, and share to help us reach a wider audience.